Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for another one of my top 10 album countdown lists from a particular year, and this time I'm tackling 2013 as I work my way back through each and every year, choosing my favourite albums from that particular year. So 2013, when I look at my list for this year, it's got lots of big names on it, lots of big artists that you're going to recognise. You know, as I pick each of these albums, I'm sure there's a good chance you're going to say, yep, I know that album, I know that artist, or even you think, yep, he's mentioned that one before, I remember him talking about that album. I just think that just seems to be how it is for 2013. There were just lots of big names actually releasing some good material. And it's therefore not quite coincidence, I don't think, that these names, that these albums have ended up on my list. It just so happens that the big names, I think, were delivering some really good albums in that year. So anyway, without giving too much more away, I'm going to start now with my honourable mentions before I start with the actual top 10, as I always do with these lists. So let's start with the first honourable mention, which is Black Sabbath's 13. So I mean, there's a big name for you straight off the bat, Black Sabbath, with their comeback album with Ozzy on vocals. And I really quite liked this album. I thought it was, you know, there was nothing particularly new from the Sabbath playbook here, but it was still a really quite a strong album with lots of songs I really quite enjoyed. I particularly remember Loner and Dear Father as two tracks I liked, Live Forever as well. You know, really good album actually. Like I say, nothing that, you know, it all sounded a bit familiar, but it was still a good album for Sabbath to come back with in 2013, and I thought it worthy of an honourable mention, at least from 2013. So next up is Dark Tranquillity's Construct. That's my next honourable mention. The Melodeath band, one of the classic bands, releasing an interesting album here. It's not going to be the kind of album that's for everyone, you know, it's not one of their faster, you know, furious kind of albums, if I can put it like that. It's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more dark, but it kind of seeps under your skin, you know, and once you get to know the album, you actually really start to quite enjoy it. And I found this with Construct, and I thought this one, again, worthy of an honourable mention for 2013. Next up, my next honourable mention, another massive name. I mean, Queens of the Stone Age, Like Clockwork. That's my next honourable mention, and I really like this album. I think it's got some great songs on here. I remember playing this quite a lot in 2013, and I think almost on plays alone it has worked its way into contention for this list, and I thought deserving of that mention. I really love the title track and My God is the Sun as two of the more memorable songs from this album, as I remember. I just think it's a very solid Queens of the Stone Age album. And I still haven't listened to Times New Roman. I'm still pretty not up to date when it comes to Queens of the Stone Age. I need to catch up. But I remember this album, I remember liking it, so that's why I'm mentioning it here now. Another honourable mention, and they're a band that have been an honourable mention on at least one of my other lists, and that's Serenia, coming up again here, throwing them in to the mix again, because I have been enjoying their albums, and this is their release, which was called Perils of the Deep Blue. It's another one of these albums that had Aileen, I think, was singer at the time. It's another kind of, it's when they were going more symphonic, but they still had some gothic, I think, elements that were part of their sound at that time. And just some really great cuts on here, particularly towards the end of the album. I think this Serenia album gets really, really good. It's one I particularly enjoy, that happens to be from 2013. And my final honourable mention is a name that many of you will be familiar with, I'm sure, on my channel, that I've mentioned before. I did an album ranking for him a couple of years ago. That's Joe Satriani, and his release from 2013, Unstoppable Momentum, which I thought was a really great release from Joe Satriani. Not necessarily, you know, him pushing any boundaries or doing anything much different from what he normally does, but what he does on here, he just does super, super well. You know, it's a little bit like, you know, very familiar sounding Joe Satriani, but everything a Satch fan, I think, would want from a Satch album. I love the way he develops his melodies on this album. I think they're just a really great sound, some exciting tracks and interesting, you know, some of his more evocative guitar lines, I would say, on here as well. I really enjoy Unstoppable Momentum, and I listened to that one quite a lot in 2013. It was kind of an uplifting album. I liked the idea of momentum in 2013. I just moved to London. I was just settling into London. And yeah, it was like there was a bit of a momentum in my life at the time. So it kind of works with that as well. Anyway, now we move on to the top 10. My number 10 is Killswitch Engage, Disarm the Descent. The return album for them with Jesse coming back on vocals. And to me, this is a little bit like Alive or Just Breathing, but part 2 of that. And not quite as, it didn't hit me quite the same. I mean, I absolutely adore Alive or Just Breathing. But this kind of felt like a bit of a sequel to that album with Jesse coming back. And some of the songs sounding a little bit like something you might hear on Alive or Just Breathing, I guess. And I really enjoy this album. I think it's got some cracking tracks on here. You know, some really good stuff. I think of the ballad, I think of Beyond the Flames, I think it is. That particular song, really exciting stuff. Some really dynamic tracks. That's my number 10, Killswitch Engage, Disarm the Descent. My number 9 is Still Corners and Strange Pleasures, another album I really love from that year, and with a couple of songs on here that I've played hundreds and hundreds of times. This is Still Corners are a husband and wife duo, again another band I've mentioned a few times on the channel, but this is the album from them I think that's my favourite. I really love this album. It's just got some songs on here that I can just play interminably, just over and over again. And they're really great. They kind of have this chill wave synth pop sounds that they're really making good use of in this album. Very lush, very melodic, beautiful vocal lines from Tessa Murray, and really enjoy this album. And my favourite track's probably Going Back to Strange. I think that is just hauntingly beautiful, 2.5 minute cut. And it's absolutely fantastic. So that's my next number 9, Still Corners, Strange Pleasures. Coming up at number 8 is Scar the Martyr. With their self-titled and only album, I think. This was a Joey Jordison supergroup. You also had in here Jed Simon from Strapping Young Lads and Chris Norris at Darkest Hour previously. And I really liked this Scar the Martyr. I think it's a dark horse release from that year. I don't think it gets enough credit. I think it's a really good album. Yes, it's a little repetitive, and for me, it starts off a little bit slow, or at least there weren't many tracks at the very beginning that I liked. But as the album goes on, there's more and more here that sounds really, really good. It's kind of like if Slipknot went industrial, but it's a great album. Cruel Ocean, for example, great track. I think it's White Nights in a Day Room, another amazing song. So that's my number 8, Scar the Martyr's self-titled album. Coming in at number 7, we got Stephen Wilson with The Raven That Refused to Sing. And other stories. I love the way this album has a story behind each song. It's kind of got the supernatural theme going on. I remember doing a ranking with Mary's Music Taste for Steve Wilson solo albums last year, and this came pretty high up. I think it was my number 3. Might have even been my number 2, come to think of it. I think it was my number... Maybe it was my number 2. I'd have to think about that. But yeah, great album, and one that I really enjoy. I feel like it was building on what he did before with Grace for Drowning, but making his idea from that and his use of jazz elements even stronger, a bit more concise, bringing all that together, and you got a great album with The Raven That Refused to Sing in 2013. Now I'm moving on to number 6, which is Omnium Gatherum and their album Beyond, the 6th album from a Finnish melodic death metal band. And, you know, very melodic, this album, really beautiful cuts. If you like Insomnium, you'll probably like Omnium Gatherum. I think they even share 1 or 2 of the same band members. And it's a really super album with songs like New Dynamic, Who Could Say, The Unknowing. I played some of those songs to death back in 2013, or maybe it was 2014 I actually discovered this album, to be fair. But it's always been an album from that year that I've really, really enjoyed. Now we move to the top 5, The Real Deal from 2013. And this is again where we get some very big names, because at number 5 is Alice in Chains, one of my all-time favourite bands, with The Devil Put Dinosaurs here. I think this is a great album. I think it's a little bit long, it's why it's not quite higher, but because of my attachment to this album and the association I have with it from 2013, from that particular year, that's why it's as high as it is, because this album brings back a lot of memories from 2013. If I listen to this album, it makes me think, oh yeah, I remember, that was that year. That was that year I was moving into the city. That was that year that happened, that happened. and it's because the songs bring back the memories of that time period. So it's just an album which has become synonymous with 2013. If any album represents 2013 for me, it's Alice in Chains, The Devil Put Dinosaurs Here. Love a lot of songs on here. I love Stone, I love Voices, Hollow, the opening track's pretty cool. I really enjoy Scalpel and Phantom Limb towards the latter part of the album too. It's just a really strong album, still from Alice in Chains in their newer era, but still really good. Perhaps I don't quite love this one quite as much as the other album from their newer era that came before this one, but it's still a great Alice album, and that is The Devil Put Dinosaurs Here at number 5. Number 4, we've got, I think, what would be a popular choice from a lot of metal fans from 2013. It's Carcass and Surgical Steel, an album which I thought brought back some of the ferocity of their early albums. It was obviously a return album again, a comeback album from another big name. And Jeff Walker's lyrics I really enjoy in this album as well. I think it's really just super tight arrangements, really great instrumentals, really great sound. Love that it's still got a little bit of freshness here and there in the album, which appeals to me. And yeah, I enjoy this Carcass album a lot as well. Surgical Steel, great record from that year. At number 3, I've got probably my favourite Black Dahlia Murder album, Ever Black. I think this was a great album from this band, and you've got Brian Ashback and Ryan Knight delivering the goods on the guitars, some absolutely superb solos and riffage, and it's just all the way through this album. I love generally all the Black Dahlia Murder albums. For me, this one tends to stick out and tends to be the one I revisit perhaps the most, apart from maybe Nocturnal. Is it Nocturnal? From 2007. But this one's a great one. Superb riffing and lead work, as I say, on the guitars. The first album actually that featured Alan Cassidy on drums and Max Lavelle on bass guitar as well. So now it brings me on to my number 2, and actually I've switched around my number 1 and 2 from this year since 2013. So my number 2 now is Alter Bridge and Fortress. And when I revisited these albums, I realised I think I just like this other album slightly more. My number 1 I just like just a tiny, by the tiniest margin, a little bit more. But my number 2 is Alter Bridge Fortress. Might be a surprise. I mean, I guess I'm not often listing, I don't put so many of this kind of an album, this kind of sort of rock album. Alter Bridge are leaning a bit more into commercial territory for me. I don't tend to listen to them that often, to be honest, but this particular album is a great album. It's got some of their best songs, some of Kennedy and Tremonti's best work for me on this album. Really awesome stuff. I love it almost as much, maybe if not more, than Alter Bridge 3, another album from them I really quite like. The title track is amazing on this album, Fortress. It's one of my favourites from the band. Addicted to Pain, Cry of Achilles. Just some really good, solid, hard-hitting rock tracks. Great solo work. And yeah, that's my number 2 from 2013, which leaves just my number 1. Of course, it's a band you all know I love. You know I'd like to talk about them whenever there's really an opportunity. And here they are, my number 1 for 2013, The Living Infinite by Soilwork. Another album which sort of makes me think of that year once again, a bit like the Alice in Chains album. It's a little bit much one of those albums by association that I think, yeah, I remember that year, I remember that album. And this is their 9th studio album. It's their first double album, actually. It was more like a lot of great songwriting, a lot of great songs, memorable songs, like a collection of Soilwork trying a few different things and a few different styles, but bringing them all together, making for a great double disc album. And it may not be for everyone, and it's actually, I do generally prefer the Soilwork that's the all-out, fast, furious, melodic death metal from the late 90s, early 2000s era. But I do have a great appreciation for this album. I think it's a great album, and I've decided, actually, when it comes to 2013, at the moment, it's my number 1 album of 2013. Thank you all for watching. As always, don't forget to drop a like and a sub if you enjoy this kind of content. Don't forget I do album reviews. I've got Symphonic Sundays running at the moment, which is a series dedicated to symphonic metal, and we've also got horror and fantasy content as well coming up on the channel too. So thank you very much. As always, guys, until next time, bye for now.